My body is my choice. Free Palestine. Defund the police. Socialism is the new communism. A man cannot become a woman. Immigrants are not welcome here. How many of those statements did you agree with? How many did you disagree with? Well, did you know that all of those statements can be considered hate speech, depending on who you ask? Throughout American history, all kinds of voices, opinions, and thoughts have been expressed no matter the sentiment. Because whether or not you approve or hate what I'm about to say, you must support my right to say it. Such is the freedom of speech, protection for the speech that you approve and that you despise. And yet in recent years, we've seen a pushback on this fundamental right. So today, through 3 points, I'm going to be talking to you about hate speech, America's push for tolerance, and why our fundamental constitutional right is now in danger. Let's start off with point 1, why America is eliminating hate speech. The fact of the matter is that America has become a hyper-emotional country. According to the novel Untangling Emotions by Aleister J. Groves, he writes, quote, "The loudest voice in the room, at least in Western culture, tells us that our emotions are everything, the most important thing, the thing that defines us. This means that the greatest damage you can do to someone is not affirm what that individual feels," end quote. In Western culture, we've placed our feelings and emotions on a pedestal. And because of that, whatever negatively impacts those emotions is of the utmost importance to eliminate. In other words, as we continue to have a tendency to hide and prioritize those emotions, we will also have a tendency to censor speech that causes perturbance, disturbance, and aggression. The oncoming rise of cancel culture has raised many questions in society about what kind of speech should be allowed. According to the Knight Foundation, 91% of Americans believe that protecting free speech is an important part of our American democracy. And yet, over 40% of the same poll said that they would be completely accepting of the government placing a ban on hate speech. The Foundation for Individual Rights did a survey of 500 college campuses across the nation to discover that 90% of them had bans on speech that was considered offensive and intolerant, including speech that spoke out against LGBTQ rights, abortion rights, and affirmative action movements. America's push for tolerance will also push an agenda to destroy speech that fights that same tolerance. A misguided article published recently by the Washington Post urged citizens to pressure the government to pass legislation to ban hate speech. Their reason for this? Because they believe that hate speech creates an intolerant society. America now statistically wants to ban hate speech, but we don't realize the implications of such a move. According to the Pew Research Center, over 60% of Americans think that you can ban hate speech and still protect free speech. This is profoundly incorrect, and so we must speak out to ensure that our primary constitutional right is protected. This brings me to my second point. Point 2, how the Constitution protects hate speech. In order to understand how or why the Constitution protects hate speech, we must first look at the mindset behind it. Free speech originates as a philosophy from the concept of self-ownership, meaning that every man has an inalienable right to himself. Philosopher John Locke stated that every man has a right to his labors, his body, and therefore his words. The Founding Fathers were inspired by this radical notion, and that's what prompted them to write the First Amendment. James Madison, chief author of the Bill of Rights, once said that the First Amendment was the most important of them all. After all, if citizens could not speak out to criticize or condemn the government, not only was freedom of speech in danger, but every single other freedom as well. The First Amendment states, quote, "Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of a religion or prohibiting the exercise thereof, and make no law abridging freedom of speech or of the press," end quote. Throughout American history, the United States Supreme Court has made it very clear that freedom of speech has been and will continue to be protected. One case in particular in the 1960s illustrated to the world the high bar that America has for ruling speech is unconstitutional. In 1969, a man by the name of Clarence Brandenburg, who was a member of the Ku Klux Klan, was recorded stating derogatory and degrading slurs about African Americans. Brandenburg was charged by the Supreme Court of Ohio for inflammatory and dangerous speech. Brandenburg then appealed his ruling to the Supreme Court, where they decided that Brandenburg's speech was constitutional, since he had not committed any damage to physical property or violence. This ruling set a precedent. Justice Douglas, who was on the case at the time, explained the court's ruling saying this, quote, "The unlawfulness of speech should be measured by action taken to further the belief, not the nature of the belief itself," end quote. This precedent meant that no matter how evil, cruel, unkind, or mean that speech is, the speaker still has the right to express their ideas. I'm not saying that hate speech can't be cruel and it can't be unkind, but I am saying that it is constitutional. The Foundation for Economic Education once said it like this, quote, "While some people are justifiably offended by racial or sexual insults, there is not and cannot be a right to not be offended," end quote. The Constitution protects all people's right to express their ideas, even if you disagree with what their ideas are. This brings me to my third and final point. Point 3, why it matters. America now wants to ban hate speech, but we don't realize the implications of such a move. A ban on hate speech eventually leads to a ban on all speech, because once you take away a government's check on free speech, you never fully get it back. And this means we must support everyone's right to speak, even if we disagree with what they say. In 1984, Gregory Lee Johnson doused the American flag in kerosene and he lit it on fire. The colors of red, white, and blue went up in flames as he stood in Dallas City Hall burning our national symbol. Johnson's case for free speech reached the Supreme Court, where they decided that his speech was constitutional, since the First Amendment protects all symbolic speech, no matter how hateful. I'm in no way saying that burning the flag is right or correct, but I am saying that it is protected by the First Amendment. This means that we must protect people's right to speak, even those who burn the flag. Those who burn the flag, in another sense, endorse it by illustrating the expansive liberties that America will protect at all costs, even at the cost of our own flag. Countries all over the world ring out the warnings of banning hate speech. Just this past year in the United Kingdom, the New Hampshire government passed a law banning all speech that caused the recipient distress and anxiety. There has been 7,000 charges and over 100 arrests in just this past year alone. One man who had made a comment against the trans rights flag had police officers show up to his house and throw him in jail. His crime? That his social media post had caused anxiety in his community. That is the same exact future that America faces if we also choose to ban hate speech. Our neighbors, our communities, our friends, our family, they think that banning hate speech is going to create a more loving and tolerant America. But instead, all it does is create a country where what is allowed to be said is only controlled by mob rule about what culture currently thinks is politically correct. Many years ago, my family and I lived on the same street as a very nice Jewish family. My eldest sister and I were best friends with their eldest daughter, and I spent many afternoons in their house. In recent months, wars broken out between Israel and Palestine, and many universities across the nation, including MIT, Penn State, Harvard, and many others have shown rapid support for Palestine, including holding anti-Semitic protests that call Jewish people murderers and oppressors. My mother, while recently on the phone with their mom, expressed her concerns at these protests, and how she responded shocked me. She said no matter what they said about Jewish people, the state of Israel, or even her family, she would support their right to freedom of speech, because she knows that she protects their right to freedom of speech, so in turn will her right to freedom of speech be protected in the future. She aligns her beliefs with renowned political activist Noam Chomsky, who once said this, quote, "If we do not believe in freedom of speech for those we despise, then we do not believe in it at all." So I encourage you, the next time you hear someone say something you dislike, read a post that you disagree with, or see an article that makes you grind your teeth, to remember to appreciate the First Amendment and the Constitution for what it is, that it protects all people's right to speak, no matter what you speak about. Thank you.